Welcome to the Unitarian Church of Lincoln on this Sunday morning. My name is the Reverend Oscar Sinclair. Each week since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic last March, our congregation has gathered together at least twice. On Thursday night, when we tend to our community and each other directly on Zoom, and in this service on Sunday morning, broadcast on YouTube. Sunday morning, whether in person at 6300 A Street or on YouTube, is a chance to proclaim who we are and what we are about, throwing open the doors of the congregation and proclaiming the radical love and welcome that is at the heart of the faith that we share. The Unitarian Church of Lincoln aspires to be a loving community, uniting reason with spiritual exploration to transform ourselves and the world. And right now, in this year when so much is uncertain, we know that transformation is necessary. This is the place for it. This is the time. Who will we be? How will we be? In this time of anxiety and pandemic and fear, what are we called to be as a community? In our 150th year as a congregation, who are we and what are we doing? This is, as Reverend Susan Frederick Gray puts it, no time for a casual faith. She also says this is no time to go it alone. And this, right now, right here, is where we practice that. So take a moment as we begin the service this morning. Be present right here, right now. Let go of what you've carried here this morning. Set aside what will come later. Be right here. There is work to be done. Let's be about it. This morning, we join with Unitarian Universalist congregations across the country in a shared service put together by the Unitarian Universalist Association's organizing collective, UU The Vote. I'm excited to be a part of this. I'm excited to hear a homily from Susan Frederick Gray, where she unpacks what it means that to have a faith that where we do not go it alone and where we do not treat faith casually in this moment in time. This weekend is also National Voter Registration Day, which I know they're talking about as part of the service, and we'll end with a call to action. Our chalice lighting words this morning come from the Reverend Eric Walker Wickstrom. Here today, in this place and with these people, may we listen so that we can hear. May we hear so that we can feel. May we feel so that we can know. And may we know so that we can change ourselves and this world. May this chalice we light our way. Will you please join in singing our opening hymn, number 337, in the Gray Hymnal, Have I Not Known?
Have I not known the sky and sea put on a look as hushed and stilled as if some ancient prophecy drew close upon to be fulfilled? Like mist the houses shrink and swell, like blood the highways throb and beat, the sapless stones beneath my feet turn fully yet with miracle. And life and death but one thing
Our story today is called I Can Write the World by Joshunda Sanders, illustrated by Charlie Palmer. The sun lights the sky over the Bronx, bright orange and yellow, the smell of freshly baked bread in the air from the bakery up the street, the rattle of a fruit stand below. Rising up from the corner below, honking horns, salsa and hip hop music, the beeping of a truck that tows, my Bronx is a world of many colors and sounds, shapes and sizes that are bright and bold. My name is Ava Murray. I am 8 years old. Mornings with mommy include the news, images and words I don't always catch, views from the outside in. I think these are stories about my home, but how I feel and what I see don't always match. A girl about my age flashes on screen. It looks like adults are just being mean. She did something against the rules, painting pretty pictures that make plain walls sparkle like jewels. Why is she in trouble? I asked my mom, Kim. Because she made something pretty, but she didn't ask for permission, Mom says. The art is called graffiti, and it's one way kids who want to create share their talents with the world. Creativity is using what you have to make a map of your dreams. What you see in your mind or feel in your heart can come out in dance, colors, or beats. When she was my age, there were no art classes at school, but Black and brown kids taught themselves to move, sketch, rap, and made hip hop culture cool. Sometimes the way the world sees us is different from how we see ourselves, Mom says. She's talking about the news and its views. See the frame around the window? It shapes everything you see below. Journalists on the news are like the window frame, Mom says. They tell the stories they think we should know. Listening to Mom talk makes me imagine myself watching the Bronx from the sidewalk, talking to my neighbors, typing up the stories I find everywhere I walk. At school, the thoughts and feelings still swirl when we're asked to write about what we love, about where we live. I remember Mom's story and think, I can write the world. Can I interview you for my first story? I ask Mom. Of course, Ava, I'd be honored, she says, her face lighting up like sunshine. Tell me more about the music and art you and your classmates made. At an old park, she says, this is where it all began with Grandmaster Flash and Kool Herc, who made new sounds from music with records and a microphone. Like a lot of our neighbors who are from islands like Puerto Rico or Haiti or Jamaica, when they came to the Bronx, they brought the sounds of their homelands, salsa, reggae. Hip hop music has all of that in it too, along with African drum beats, dance hall jazz, rhythm, and blues. She reminds me of the huge parties in the summer on our block with speakers so big the music makes the whole Bronx rock. Everything we make is connected to the past, Mom says. It's how you make the art you love last. Long ago in Egypt, the first graffiti was made of symbols called hieroglyphs. The meaning of every mark then and now was tailored and specific. When I tell the story of the Bronx I know and love, I share the story of art forms that traveled miles and years to get here. Some stories about our home focus on the bad, not the good, I say at the end. But what is most beautiful in our world, what makes the Bronx stand out, may not always be understood. What matters most is that we know we are connected to people who have always made the most of the world they were given, making visible the beauty that otherwise might be hidden. This is what journalists have always done, so I decide I will become one. To be continued. We too have the opportunity to write the world. Please join me.
I was asked recently by Dorothy Ramsey to talk about why I support this church and what this church means to me. Now that I'm here, my first instinct is to say, go listen to Wendy Hesterman's testimonial from last week. That's what I want to say. I guess, though, I should say, make some of my own remarks. One thing Wendy said that resonated especially strongly with me was her description of her first experiences of the church. She said, I found folks who accepted me as I was, waited patiently for me to share my story, and supported me when I chose to do so. When I first came to UCL, it was as an anti-ringer for the choir. I was a waif and stray whom Julie Ennison took pity on and allowed to sing in public. My involvement in the church increased because I found here things that I didn't know I needed. I found here people I didn't know I needed to meet. I found something that fully matched Julie's early description of it as a pretty special place. A couple of months ago, I spoke in a Vespers service about my complicated relationship with belonging. I'm not a joiner by nature. It takes me a long time, and I mean years, to get to the point where I feel socially comfortable in a new group of people. At this church, I was made welcome even when my desire to be welcomed was not 100% obvious. And that welcome changed my life. I've changed. I have been changed by the members of this church. My unjoining self has joined the Unitarian Church of Lincoln. I found here what the poet Wisława Szymborska calls unfathomable life. Oscar's been reminding us recently that a church isn't its building, it's the congregation. And boy, do I wish I could see all of you in person. And I've said a little about how I have felt at home in and welcomed by this congregation. But that, of course, is only half the story. The other half is what our congregation does in the world. I'm an atheist Unitarian. I believe, with Edwin Markham, that here on the paths of every day, here on the common human way, is all the stuff the gods would take to build a heaven, to mold and make new Edens. Ours is the task sublime to build eternity in time. The Unitarian Church of Lincoln is a refuge for me, but also a beacon in the community, a bundle of busy people out to make a difference, a group of people taking up the task of building eternity. Special places exist because people put their heart and soul into them. Special places exist because people invest in them. Special places exist over generations because many people in their time do their bit to pass on something special to the future. So I try to do my bit to help pass on the Unitarian Church of Lincoln into 2021, into 2121, and on into the increasingly uncertain yet precious future. Thanks.
Come, come, whoever you are, wonder, worshipper, lover of living. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come. Come, come, whoever you are, wonder, worshipper, lover of living. Ours is no caravan of despair. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, come, whoever you are, wonder, worshipper, lover of living. Ours is no caravan of despair. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come.
Come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come. I listen to a lot of stories of how people found Unitarian Universalism, how they were introduced by a friend, how they were looking for some place to bring their kids up as moral people. And a pretty common refrain in those stories is some reference to the hymn, "Come, come, whoever you are." It captures something important and relatively common about the experience of Unitarian Universalism. Maybe it's the emphasis on hope. Ours is no caravan of despair. Maybe it's the extravagant welcome, "Come, come, whoever you are." Whatever the varied reasons, I have lost count of the stories I have heard about this hymn. But the hymn, as we sing it in our hymnal, is as notable for what is missing as what is there, for what we don't hear as much as what we do. In the original words of Rumi, the poem goes like this: "Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving, though you've broken your vow 1,000 times. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come." As Mary Gregolia puts it, there are right there the core of Rumi's words, smack dab in the center. Though you've broken your vow 1,000 times. And this is not just a copy edit. The Reverends Ranwa Khomeini and Sana Seed, writing in a call to our Unitarian Universalist siblings from Muslim Unitarian Universalists, put it this way: the hymn fails to include the theologically essential words, "though you've broken your vows 1,000 times." These omitted words highlight the merciful nature of Allah, central to Islamic theologies, and the acknowledgement that it is human nature to make mistakes, including ones that cause harm. This month, we are contemplating deep listening in our worship. But it is not enough to simply listen, because often there are stories that we do not hear. There's a spot in each of your eyes where the optic nerve passes through the optic disc, blocking the retina. And that spot, about 7 inches high and 6 inches wide, the eye cannot physically see anything. Luckily, we have 2 eyes, which cover for each other, but in cases when one eye is closed or otherwise obstructed, the brain fills in the missing image. This is not the only time our brains do this, inferring what is there and what isn't. There's an illusion where you can see this on screen, so we're going to use this instead of the blind spot. It's called Troxler's fading. And you put in a central dot surrounded by a diffuse circle. So if you're able to, make this video full screen. Now focus on the red dot at the center of the screen. And for many people, after a few seconds, the circle around the dot fades from view. We see what we focus on, but the circle that is out of focus disappears. Different people have different viewpoints. Some of you are quick to see things that are missing. Some of us are quick to infer what's in our blind spots, making our best guess, sometimes subconsciously, about what's there. Some folks noticed a black dot appear next to my head a few seconds ago and have been trying to figure out if a pixel on their device went out just now. And others are wondering what I'm talking about. Whether we think of this as the blind spot on our retina, or the frame of a window that defines the stories that we hear, as the story that Chelsea read this morning described it, it's really easy to miss hearing the stories that confound our expectations, that change the meaning of a song or the Bronx. We need each other to point out what we cannot see, the stories that we are not listening for, because we so often miss what is essential, what is right there in the middle, even if we aren't singing it. We are each a collection of stories that we bring to this place. And every week we set aside time during the service to share the moments of our lives with each other, the joys and sorrows that make this community beloved. So, as Come Come Whoever You Are plays again, this time with the missing line, I invite you to write your name, or the name of someone you are holding in joy or sorrow this morning, into the chat box next to this video. And listen. Listen to the stories from the congregation. Listen to the joys and sorrows of each other, both what is written and what is unwritten. I'll see you in a few minutes.
Come, come, whoever you are, wonder, worshiper, lover of leaving. Though you have broken your vows 1,000 times, ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come. Come, come, whoever you are, wonder, whoever you're leaving. Though you have broken your vow 1,000 times, ours is no caravan of despair. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, come, whoever you are, wonder, worship, whoever you're leaving. Though you have broken your vow 1,000 times, ours is no caravan of despair. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come.
When I started attending a UU church, I was excited by the promise of worship that would draw from the arts and science and nature and literature and a multitude of voices. We hear Thoreau, Emerson, and Ballou and others each week. Their words are beautiful, but they come from a culture and experience that's foreign to me. When do I get to hear voices from my culture? I quickly learned that other than the same few quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. and Howard Thurman's The Work of Christmas, it wasn't going to happen. I sit attentively and listen with my head to their voices while my heart longs to hear more of our voices. I am a Black woman. When I look around on Sunday morning, I don't see many people who look like me. In a lot of the churches I visit, I don't see anyone who looks like me. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised that I don't hear voices of people who share my experience. But still, it hurts. I want to hear voices that tell of the struggle of living under the weight of oppression in this culture of white supremacy. I want to hear stories of trying to stay afloat in this water we swim in. I want to hear voices of living while Black in America. I don't hear those voices in UU churches, so I have to supplement my worship by reading Black theologians like Anthony Pinn and Monica Coleman. I read Maya Angelou, James Baldwin, and my favorite, poet Paul Laurence Dunbar. Though not a Unitarian or a Universalist, Dunbar chronicled the African American experience in the years following the Civil War and the emancipation of enslaved Africans. A time of opportunity for Blacks as we migrated north in droves seeking employment and education, but also a time of continuing segregation, racism, and oppression. Dunbar acknowledged this tension in his writing. We hear him long for joy and prosperity while at the same time knowing that the system would conspire to keep true happiness just beyond his grasp. A pint of joy to a peck of trouble, and never a laugh but the moans come double, and that is life, he wrote. Still, he was a champion of social justice, believing that God has sympathy for the plight of the oppressed, and that his grace will be bestowed not on those who soar, but they who plod their rugged way unhelped to God. For Dunbar, the struggle was real. 100 years later, hearing Dunbar express his frustration and give voice to the contradictions of our existence as African Americans encourages me and nourishes my soul. His voice speaks to my heart. He knows my pain and understands my sadness, my fear, and my rage. He understands the tears I cry as I pray for strength to get through another day in this world. He gives voice to my deep faith that real change is coming someday. He didn't see it in his lifetime, and I may not see it in mine, but I have to keep believing it's coming and it's possible. That's the message many African Americans long to hear in church. I know that's what I need to hear every now and then. Will it ever happen? Or will we always have to go outside to hear our voices? If that's the case, maybe there's no place for us in Unitarian Universalism. The thought of leaving is painful, but so is being in a faith that ignores our voices.
There's a story of Unitarian Universalism in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, Atlanta is not exactly the birthplace of Unitarianism, but around the same time that the Universalist Society of Lincoln was founded and Unitarian missionaries were getting a foothold in Omaha, the Unitarians founded a church in Atlanta on West Peachtree Street. In a sign of the times in which it was built, it was called the Church of Our Father. In 1947, the then renamed Unitarian Universalist Church of Atlanta called the Reverend Isaiah Jonathan Domus, who moved to Atlanta from North Adams, Massachusetts. And less than 2 years after that, his ministry in Atlanta ended, and the Unitarian and Universalist denominations withdrew all support for the Atlanta congregation. By 1951, the congregation closed and the building was sold to the Bible Research Society. What happened to cause this collapse? Now, one way of telling the story is that in the 70 years of its existence, the Church of Our Father in Atlanta had 27 ministers. The longest single tenure was the Reverend Joseph Conkling, who served 6 whole years before resigning to take a commission in the U.S. Army during the First World War. He then died in France. But the other way to tell the story, and the one that I learned in seminary, was that Atlanta was the place where Unitarianism and Universalism were forced to choose a side on the issue of segregation. Isaiah Domus was not a subtle preacher. In the first year he was in Atlanta, he publicly supported the presidential candidacy of the Progressive Party's Henry Wallace, which called, among other things, for desegregation of public schools, racial and gender equity, free trade, a national health insurance program, and consolidatory policies towards the Soviet Union. Domus's support of the Progressive Party, as well as his friendship with organizer Don West, caused the Atlanta Constitution to publish an editorial in August 1948 stating, "This fact will cause most of the local Unitarian church members to fret even more than they are. They are convinced that the Communist Party has caused the Unitarian Church, because of its liberal policy, to be selected for infiltration purposes and for use in various Communist Front purposes. But also, in the fall of 1947, Domus invited Dr. Thomas Baker Jones, a Black Unitarian from Ohio, to join the Atlanta Church for worship. Domus later, in a letter to the American Unitarian Association, recounted the events that followed. He was seated without incident, even to the taking of his offering, but the matter was hardly allowed to rest there. An ultra-race-conscious minority promptly rushed to the telephone and served notice on those two members of the board with whom they felt they had the most in common, that I should be fired forthwith. The next Sunday, I did what any right-thinking liberal minister might do under the circumstances. I preached a sermon denouncing race discrimination, in church or out, and defended, most emphatically, Dr. Jones's God-given right to do precisely what he did. God may have made the case for brotherhood on the sixth day of creation, but Atlanta's Unitarian Universalist Church had yet to make up its mind. A formal vote was called for. On December 5th, 1947, 21 members of the liberal congregation voted to formally segregate the church. 15 opposed the measure. The rest, in the best Southern tradition, Domus writes, declined to cast a ballot. Dr. Jones spent the following Sundays at home, there being no separate but equal Unitarian Universalist church for persons of the colored or black race, as the new church policy put it. Isaiah's daughter Claudia, who was 10 years old at the time, later wrote that when the Ku Klux Klan threatened our family in the fall of 1947, I was too young to be told and too short to look out the high windows. If I saw anything alarming, it was the odd way my parents stared at the street. My mother stood on one side of a closed drape, my father on the other. Each lifted just enough cloth to let in a sharp slice of Georgia sunlight. On West Peachtree Street, 2 floors below, a convoy of battered cars and rusty pickup trucks stretched from 3rd Street to Ponce de Leon. Each was full of Klansmen in white robes, tilting back their pointed hoods to hunt for motion behind our drapes. In May 1948, Isaiah Domus offered his resignation to the church, and they accepted it by a vote of 33 to 32. The American Unitarian Association withdrew support for the congregation. The Universalists quickly followed. And that was the end of organized Unitarian Universalism in Atlanta for some time. So why tell this long story about a church halfway across the country in a sermon about listening for what's missing? Because Atlanta was not Isaiah Domus's last ministry. Lincoln, Nebraska was. In the basement of 6300 A Street and at History Nebraska's archives, there are pages and pages of documents about this congregation. We have editorials from Arthur Weatherly, letters about the Chapin's ministry, stacks upon stacks upon stacks of sermons from Charles Stephen. But the folder marked I.J. Domus is almost empty. There's the material from the search committee that called him, and then a letter to the congregation announcing his resignation 2 years later, and almost nothing exists from the time in between. There's at least one intriguing document for me, though. In 1955, longtime member Homer Kyle preached a sermon about the history of the church. Most of it is stories we've already told as part of the 150th anniversary celebration this year, or stories that we're going to tell. But there's a paragraph towards the end that reads like this. A call was given to the Reverend I.J. Domus of Erie, Pennsylvania, and he accepted and came to our church during the last week of December 1952. Then, if you can't make out the handwriting, it reads, Mr. Domus had a vivid personality and an uncompromising attitude toward all who disagreed with him on those matters which he deemed to be fundamental. During the time that he was with us, he attracted many new members to the church. After a short ministry, the details of which are well known to most of you, he resigned in February 1955. Now, if you're listening to this sermon instead of watching it, I've put the manuscript up on the screen. And to be blunt, this is what sermon manuscripts look like when you have no idea what you want to or should say. Homer Kyle could write that the details of which are well known to most of you, but posterity does not know. Those details were not written down in any place that I've found yet. But you can tell from the markings and remarkings and edits and re-edits just of this one paragraph that whoever wrote it was struggling to figure out what had happened and what it meant. 3 years later, Homer Kyle preached again on the church's history, and this time there aren't edits, it's a simple paragraph. It just says, Mr. Domas was tremendously interested in race relations and did much during his comparatively brief stay in Lincoln to assist the community in assimilating its various minority groups. It's a matter of public record that Isaiah Domas did not serve another Unitarian church after his time in Lincoln. So what are the stories that we do not hear from our history? It strikes me that the years of Domas's ministry are a kind of blind spot on the retina of this congregation's archives. We can infer quite a bit about what happened during those 3 years, but only by guessing based on context. We know from these accounts that Isaiah Domas was an uncompromising, probably prickly radical, that he, at least once before, had been very public in denouncing the church that he served. And we also know that this was right around the time that the Lincoln congregation had decided that it had outgrown its space at the 12th and H Street location and decided to move to the expanding suburban neighborhood of Eastridge. There's a lot that you can infer just from that. There are stories that we do not hear, we do not listen for. It's not enough to simply listen. We need to ask the question, what stories are missing? We need to search out what those missing stories are, and then we need to listen to the answer, even if it says something about our community that we would rather not know. Think back to that point, surrounded with a circle. Troxler is fading. Remember how when we focus on a single point, the surrounding circle fades away, our brains neglecting anything that is out of focus. Stories are like that. Listening is like that. So what are the stories that you don't hear? How can you seek them out? Because even if we've missed those stories in the past, even if we've broken our vows 1,000 times, there is space for those stories to be heard. Come, yet again come. Amen.
Each week we take up a collection to support the work of our church, and there are many ways that you can give a contribution. You can send a check to 6300 A Street, Lincoln, Nebraska, 68510, or you can log into your Realm account and give online. I think the easiest way to give is through text giving. To do that, all you do is text UC Lincoln and the amount to 73256. And we've also put this information in the chat box. Thank you for your support of our work.
Love will guide us, peace has dried us, hope inside us, lead the way on the road of love, creature giving,
One announcement as we close our time together. We're trying an experiment for the next few weeks of gathering on Zoom after the Sunday morning worship service. Worship associates have taken the lead in hosting this time for discussion, and I hope you'll join us today. The link is in your e-blast that you received from the church office yesterday, as well as in the chat box for this video. For now, though, we close this service not with worry or fear, but with hope. Hope that in searching out and listening to the stories that are so often overlooked, we will become more whole as a community and as individuals. Be at peace, beloveds, and amen.